Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the stage Smithsonian Regent David Rubenstein.
Thank you. So for the rest of this morning, before we break for lunch later this afternoon, we're going to divide our program into two parts. One is about philanthropy today, and then we'll have sessions about philanthropy tomorrow. On philanthropy today, we're going to now begin with a presentation by Henry Timms. Henry is the executive director of the 92nd Street Y in New York. He's also one of the co-founders of Giving Tuesday, which is today. And so he's going to use a TED Talk format, which is 12 minutes of uninterrupted brilliance. So, Henry Timms. Thank you.
Thank you for setting such a low bar expectation. I want to start with an apology. From my accent, you can probably tell I'm not the most convincing person to be talking about American philanthropy. But I will tell you this, my great-great-great-great-grandfather was Francis Scott Key. I'm a citizen, my mother's a Texan, so my family has a pretty decent track record of donating things to the nation. Let me begin by telling you a story about Giving Tuesday. So here we are, here is the 92nd Street Y, a Jewish cultural and community center in New York, 143 years old. What we're trying to think about is how do we reimagine community for a new generation? How do we think about digital community? And so one day we had an idea. We thought, we know about Black Friday, you know about Cyber Monday. What about this? What about Giving Tuesday? What about after 2 days that are good for the economy, a day that is good for the soul? What about after 2 days of consumption, a day dedicated to compassion? So I phoned up Kathy Calvin at the UN Foundation, who's here today, and talked to her about how we take this to scale. And one thing the UN Foundation does so well is help people participate in movements. And we started to plot a campaign that began with that phone call, and today, just 3 years after we launched, has 40,000 organizations all around the world participating in Giving Tuesday. I just checked on social media, and right now the #1 conversation around the world is around giving. Now, around those 40,000 organizations participating, it's very hard to give you a flavor of what all of them do. So let me tell you just 2 stories of organizations participating today. The first is a story about teachers. You may not know this today. You'll see lots of emails about people making donations today. But around the country today on Giving Tuesday, teachers are teaching lessons in philanthropy to their kids. They're helping a new generation of philanthropists think about what they do next. Here's another story about Giving Tuesday today. What you're beginning to see around the country is people coming together in small communities. We'll hear a lot today about big philanthropy, big gifts and big names, but small philanthropy is so important too. So around the countries, in harbor cities, in small towns, people aren't just giving on their own, they're giving as part of communities. So today, all around the world, whether it's coats, whether it's blood, whether it's even organs, whether it's money, whether it's time, a new generation of people are starting a new tradition around philanthropy, what it is and why it matters. And what I want to talk about today is what we've learned from the last 3 years of this movement. So the movement began with a set of ideas, which was to say, could we think about building a new power movement around giving? So the way we delineate new and old power is we built lots of our institutions on a kind of old power frame of the world, right? So power is a currency, I've got it, you haven't. Power is held by few. Power tends to tell the world what to do. The old power frame of the world is something we are all used to. What we are all beginning to experiment with is the new power frame for the world. So in the new power world, power isn't a currency, I've got it, you haven't. Power is a current. It's something you can never truly own, but you can begin to grow and you can begin to shape. In the new power world, power isn't something that's simply held by few, it's made by many. And perhaps most of all, in the new power world, it isn't about us downloading to people about what they should be doing. It's about people for deciding on their own terms how they want to engage with the world. So the experiment we launched with Giving Tuesday was to say, how could we build a new power movement around philanthropy? And I think the reason we've had some success over the last 3 years, although we think it's very early days, is because we designed to engage more people in more meaningful ways. And the way we thought about this was this scale. So this is the participation scale, which says, how are we inviting people to become philanthropists? How are we inviting people to become a part of this movement? And it begins with the activity which is happening all around the world right now, which is this idea of sharing, getting people to share other people's content. So one thing we saw with Giving Tuesday we thought was important was all the major faith groups. So all the major faith groups came together and in their own way started to share stories about why giving was important for their traditions. What we also saw on Giving Tuesday, of course, was a lot of celebrity firepower, right? We see throughout the day today, a lot of major celebrities are getting behind Giving Tuesday. But I'd argue something different about how these new power movements are emerging. The real celebrities of Giving Tuesday, with all respect to Justin Timberlake, are not these people, but these people. This is, I think, the image of Giving Tuesday for me so far. I may not be famous, I don't have $1 million, but I can help change lives on Giving Tuesday. As we think more and more about how we change the world, our default is to celebrities, right? We want to have these wildfires of awareness. We should not neglect those campfires, those smaller moments where people link from person to person and start to build communities around ideas. Beyond sharing, we saw shaping. What became interesting about Giving Tuesday, and we really launched this as an open source movement. So we really didn't say to people, you have to do the following 6 things. We really said to people, take this idea and take a run with it. What we began to see with Giving Tuesday was this kind of interesting shaping behavior. I'll ask you all now, does anyone know who this is? Okay, this is the mayor of Batesville, Arkansas. Now, he is important in the Giving Tuesday story for the following reason. We had Mayor Bloomberg lined up to be the first mayor in the nation to declare it Giving Tuesday. This was 2012. Obviously, he had a technology background. Obviously, he had a philanthropy background. I run a New York City institution. This was going to be very good for business. The day before the press release went out saying this was going to happen, this came in via social media. This is the mayor of Batesville, Arkansas, being the first mayor in the nation to declare it Giving Tuesday. Now, in the old power world, this is a disaster. We've lost control of the narrative, right? But in the new power world, this is a sign that something is happening, right? It's a sign that things are beginning to move. And as we hear a lot about movements around the world, and we increasingly hear people talk about movements, I would always say this is a good definition of movements. It's only a movement if it moves without you. So as we think about further up this path, what we began to see as well, this is the Unselfie, which was a campaign donated by a member of the community, someone in the Giving Tuesday community, not on my staff, not at the UN Foundation, said, I have a great idea. Let's take unselfies. Let's take pictures of ourselves doing good things for the world. We've seen at this point now over 500,000 of these. And then further up the scale, we really saw where the rubber hits the road for a lot of people was in funding. And I want to tell you 2 stories about funding. This is the first. So today, if you so choose, you may get your iPhone. You may get your iPhone out and download an app and point it at a dollar bill. Once you have done that, you may make a donation to all number of nonprofits. And then if you look at your iPhone, you will see emerge in front of you a 3D holographic tower. On that 3D holographic tower will be a brick with your face on it, and it will say the cause you have committed to. By the end of Giving Tuesday today, that tower will be bigger than the Empire State Building. You think about the way a new generation of technologists are beginning to invite philanthropists in new ways, and it gets very exciting. We saw 2 on Giving Tuesday, some big financial results. This is the University of Michigan. They had set a goal of $1 million. They ended up raising 3.2 last year. We expect a good campaign this year. They turned Giving Tuesday into Giving Blue Day. Now, any University of Michigan graduates here? I've learned to do this, go blue. As I know it's not very convincing. So 3.2 million. In the old power world, if someone turns his Giving Tuesday into Giving Blue Day, what do? Cease and desist, right? That's the course you do. In the new power world, this is a sign that it is becoming theirs, it is no longer yours. You are trying to scale these things away from your institution. And then at the top of the scale, the 2 most important behaviors in my mind, one is producing, which is people who are part of the Giving Tuesday community, creating assets that benefit the whole community. And at the top is co-ownership. So we saw members of the Giving Tuesday community who weren't us create assets that strengthen the whole movement. This was a campaign this year called My Giving Story, which was an idea of Melinda Gates, where people in advance of Giving Tuesday told their stories on personal terms about why they, as everyday people, gave. This was a campaign throughout the country. We saw nonprofits create tools to help other nonprofits to raise money and to raise ideas around Giving Tuesday. And then perhaps best of all, this is a bus in Canada. So this is a bus in Canada last year, which on Giving Tuesday put on the front of the bus Giving Tuesday. I'm not sure where the people ended up going who got on that bus, but they were philanthropists, so let us be proud of them. So people started to produce things that strengthened the movement. So the movement began to generate itself. And then at the very top of the scale, where all of this ownership ends up, is when people own this idea as much as you do. All of us as philanthropists in this room know that moment where we're the chief person in charge and we want everyone else to believe in our cause. What we tried to do with Giving Tuesday was create a co-owned cause. So we saw some great things. This was Giving Shoes Day, Dress for Success. It's one of their biggest days of donating shoes for women going back into the workplace. This is Giving Zoo Day this year. All around the country, zoos have come together to demonstrate how they give back civically. And we saw something else too, which was this idea began to export. We'll hear later about the great success of Baltimore and Maryland. But right now, Giving Tuesday is happening in Brazil. We're seeing Giving Tuesday Brazil have a really good impact this year. It's happening in Kenya right now. It's happening in Singapore, where one day simply wasn't enough, and they turned it into Giving Tuesday week. So they have a full week in Singapore. And overall, what we began to see with this idea, which started just 3 years ago, was people around the world have this huge thirst to do philanthropy on their terms. What we saw with Giving Tuesday was people grabbing this idea and making it theirs. And we learned so many lessons from this experiment, but I want to finish with the three biggest lessons that we learned from Giving Tuesday. Number one, tools, not rules. One of the things we learned from Giving Tuesday was that our default was always to try and give people tools to do more philanthropy, to engage on their terms. The old power way of thinking about this would be you have to do the following things in the following 6 ways, otherwise it's not allowed to be involved. The new power way says get involved on your terms. I would note particularly as we look to break down that fourth wall and really start to create new technologies, what's going to come next with philanthropy is a huge amounts of product that is going to revolutionize this space. Idea number 2, mission over brand. So we never, at the start of this campaign, the old power design of this campaign would have been the 92nd Street Y's Giving Tuesday with the UN Foundation. Our logo would have been in every single iteration of the Giving Tuesday logo, and we'd have charged people to take part. But there's nothing in my mission statement, nothing at all that says we should be more famous. What our mission statement says is we have a set of values, we want to share them with the world. So what we learned from Giving Tuesday was actually by taking the brand out of the campaign, it let more people own it. And the third big lesson from Giving Tuesday comes from a very English source, which is Conan Doyle. So there is a great bit in The Hound of the Baskervilles where Watson turns to Holmes, and he says, in a very British insult, Dr. Watson, you are not luminous, but from time to time you are a conductor of light. You are not luminous, but from time to time you are a conductor of light. And as we look to the future and we see so much of the next decade being defined by social movements, right? My prediction is in philanthropy and elsewhere in the world, the most valuable skill is not going to be the old power skill of being luminous. The most valuable skill is going to be that new power skill of being a conductor of light. Now, upstairs, of course, is the Star-Spangled Banner, which we have a proud connection to in my family. And where this all ties back to American philanthropy is in so many ways. Across the country, people of all backgrounds, all faiths, in all communities, people you've never heard of, are coming together in an act of joining. They're coming together to join each other to strengthen this country and strengthen their communities. And that import isn't just happening in America, but it's happening now in countries around the world. And as we look ahead, we see this great possibility that what we're able to do with Giving Tuesday isn't just strengthen philanthropy, but also try to strengthen community. Someone this morning described Giving Tuesday as a barn raising, a global barn raising. And I really thought that was the perfect frame for this project. And it reminded me of perhaps the biggest lesson of all from Giving Tuesday, which is when you build a barn, you do 2 things. First, you get a barn. And second, you get a community. One of the opportunities ahead for philanthropy, I think, is not just to build more barns, but also to think really carefully about how we can build more communities. A very happy Giving Tuesday to all of you. Thank you. It's a privilege to be here today.